So this is what we will be building today. We have this UI here, we have two tabs, and we have a input on the one tab with an apply button. We did this in our last tutorial. You can apply an expression to any selected property. And we also have this one, which is new. And you can select a expression you have put inside of the drop-down, which we do in the code. And you can apply that expression here. And you can also delete expressions from this drop-down. So now we deleted the loop out and it's not in here anymore. And this panel is dockable. So we can drag it here and now we have it docked. We can use it from here. Just like all the other panels in After Effects. So we'll be using ScriptUI, but what is ScriptUI? Well, UI stands for user interface. So it's a script library from Adobe that you can use to create your own user interfaces or panels for your scripts. Like I said in my last tutorial, most programming languages are object-oriented. That means that you use objects in the code to manipulate the program to make it do what you want it to do. ScriptUI is also object-oriented. So for example, if you want to make a new panel, we need to make a new window object. After you have your window object, you can add different control objects like inputs, buttons, drop-downs, groups, tabs, and radio buttons, and much more to create the panel you want. For this particular tutorial, I'll be working with After Effects, but ScriptUI programming applies to almost the whole Adobe suite. I'll be using Visual Studio Code to create the script because not everybody can use Extendscript Toolkit nowadays because of like compatibility issues and stuff. If you want to know how to set up Visual Studio Code, you can watch my other tutorial called Visual Studio Code for Adobe Extendscript. So let's start coding. Last time we created this function right here and we just copy and pasted this UI code here that creates the UI for us. This tutorial we're going to create that UI, so let's start by just deleting all of that. If you want to know more about this little piece of code, watch my previous tutorial. For now, let's start with this tutorial. So first create a function and we're calling it new panel. Create a new panel function and then just call that function right here. A new panel. So we run this function immediately when we open our script. And then what we do is we want to create a new window object. And we do that by this. The reason why we type it like this is we want a new object of this class. When it's a class, mostly we use we type it with a capital at the beginning of the word. If it's not a class, we normally type it with a lowercase on the beginning of the name. So a function would have a lowercase, a variable, or just an object of a class, like an instance of a class would have a lowercase, but an actual class has an uppercase. And what a class is a class is a kind of like a description of how objects should look. It's not an actual object, so it's just a description of how a window should look. It's not an actual window. So this will call the constructor of this class and that will construct a new window object for us. And this constructor, as you can see, constructor here, it wants a type, it wants a title, and it wants some bounds. So let's give those inputs here. So palette, the type of window we want is a palette. The other type is a dialog, but a dialog, if that's open, you can't use After Effects. You can only use After Effects then if you close the dialog. But we want to have a UI panel next to our After Effects while we're using our After Effects. So that's why we want a palette type of window and not a dialog. And then the name of our beautiful panel is going to be expression scripts. And then the bounds, which is actually how big the panel is going to be. We're just going to leave that on undefined. That will mean that the panel is just going to get bigger when we add more stuff to it. So the content of the panel will determine how big it is. So now we have a new window object. Let's just create a var win. So we put that new object we have inside our window variable. And now we have a beautiful object, and we can say window or win.add. So we call the add function on our window object, and that's how we add like buttons. We add edit text, we add a group, icon buttons. For now, let's just add an edit text, a text box. So this is gonna add a text box to our window. Then what we want, it's gonna ask for the bounds again. We'll just leave those bounds undefined, and then it asks for the text. This is the standard text that's gonna be inside of our text field. I'm just gonna say loop out. So it will just show loop out when we open up the panel. So now we have a edit text. Let's also put that inside of a variable. And now let's also add a button. Window.add, and then we type button. The bounds, just leave that undefined, and then what's gonna be inside of the button, just put apply in there. So now we have a window with an edit text and a button. Now we want to show that window. We have a specific little piece of code. You can just come to the website. I'll link it down in the description, and scroll down here. You can just copy this little snippet. This is just a standard little thing you do for every panel. When you create a new panel, I just mostly copy paste this because it's the same for every panel, so you can do the same. You don't really know what it does. This resizes the layout when we resize our panel. We actually have to call a function for that, and this checks if our window object, if that is a window, an instance of a window class, then we want to do this. If it's an instance of a panel, we want to just set the layout correctly. So that's what this does. So now when we send this to After Effects, it will show our window and it will center our window. So now when we run this, it opens After Effects. To run it, just do Ctrl-Shift-P and then type After Effects, and you can send it to After Effects if you have the plugin for Visual Studio Code. And as you can see here, we have our little script. It does nothing yet, but let's work on that now. Let's link that up. So as you could see, like our edit text was a bit small, so let's change that. I'm just gonna say edit text dot characters is equal to 25. And what I'm gonna do here is apply button dot on click. What we're doing here is we're saying that on click, we're gonna pass that a function into there. So this variable is gonna contain a function. So when we click our apply button, it's gonna activate this function, and it's gonna do what's in here. So what we want to do is apply custom expression when we click our apply button. And now this won't work yet, because inside of here we say expression input dot text, but there's no expression input variable nowhere like here. So what we could do here is just type expression over here, and then expression over here. Apply custom expression function is going to have a parameter called expression, and we're just going to put that expression text inside of this variable, and we're just going to use that variable over here. So now what we can do is we're going to say edit text dot text. So now we pass the text that's inside of this edit text into this function, and we use it over here. So now if we fire up After Effects, it should work. So let's try it. Let's select our position and apply our loop out. As you can see, it works. Beautiful. So that is how you create your UI and link it up. But in the example, we had some more stuff. Let's start with that now. So to add a tab, let's say tab panel equals window.add. So add a new object to our window, and it's going to be called a tabbed panel. And inside our tab panel, we're gonna say, I'm just gonna add this and say tabbed panel dot add, and then we're gonna add a tab. Bounds we're gonna leave on undefined. Our name, we're gonna name it custom expression. Now we're also gonna add another tab. I'm just putting in those comments to make it a bit more readable. Tab panel dot add tab undefined, and we're gonna name this let's say expressions. Yeah, so this is a comment. It does nothing. It just nice to add some descriptions and some spacing so it's easier to read. So in our tab 1 we want to have these, and then what we want to actually do is for tab 1 create a new variable, put that tab inside of this variable, and then add the edit text and the apply button to this new tab we created. Just leave the second tab empty for now, and when you send this to After Effects, as you can see, we now have 2 tabs: custom expression and expressions. So now to this tab we're gonna add a drop down. So to add a drop down, I'm just gonna say tab 2, and then here tab 2 dot add again, and say drop down list. Bounds, leave the bounds undefined, and then right now we want to have our standard things we want to have in our drop down, and it's a list of items because a drop down can contain multiple items. So we want to have these brackets here because it's an array, so a list of items, and we're just gonna say loop out in one of those and loop in the other, just to keep it simple. So this drop down is gonna contain a list of items, loop out and loop in. Let's just put that inside a variable too, and then add a button. We wanted a button too, so apply. Let's say tab 2 dot add button undefined apply. Now add another button, drop down delete is equal to tab 2 dot add button undefined, and we're gonna say delete. So now we have filled our second tab. And now if we run this, as you can see, we have a drop down here with loop out, loop in, apply and delete. Doesn't do anything yet. So let's link up those things. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna create a new comment. Just all the actions I'm just gonna place in here. So the apply button click, but also the drop down apply, on click. So just like we did in the other one, add a function to that, on click. And what we want to do when we click here, apply custom expression, and then we need to get the selected item inside of the drop down. So drop down dot selection dot text. So this is gonna get the text from our selected item inside of our dropdown. So that's gonna be for the apply, and for the delete, what we want to do is on click is equal to function. For that we want to say expression or dropdown dot remove and we want to say dropdown.items. Wait, maybe I could just say dropdown selection, which is just going to say to remove the selected item. What we also want to do is we always want to have an item selected in our dropdown. So when we create it here, let's say also dropdown.selection is equal to 0. And now when we send this to After Effects, you can see automatically our first item is gonna be selected because we put our selection on index 0. And as you know, in the previous tutorial I told you that an array starts at 0, and then this is item number 1. So this is item number 0, item number 1. If we have a third item, it would actually have an ID of 2 because it's 0 based. So we have 2 items, and now we could say delete this one. And as you can see, we now have deleted 1 item. So that works. What I also want to do is when I delete something from our dropdown, I just want to select the first item again. So do selection is equal to 0 again. So that when we remove something, it's going to select the first item in our dropdown again. So there always will be something selected. Now that that's that, it's nice, it looks okay, but as you can see, it's different from what I showed you in our preview, because in our preview, let me open this one. In our preview here, we had a label here too, and our drop down is a bit bigger here, and our apply and delete buttons are right next to each other. And this also looks different. So let's do a bit on our styling here. So let's close this one. First of all, let's put these buttons right next to each other. So to do that, we want to create a new group. And let's say tab2.add group. And then we want that button group to have these buttons instead of the tab. And then we want to say that the button group is gonna have an orientation of row. Normally our orientation is a column, so it's all gonna be like under each other. If we put our group orientation on row, then it's gonna be right next to each other. So when we open this one up, you can see our buttons are going to be next to each other now. So that's nice. The next thing we want to do is we had a label on the dropdown. So let's add a new variable called a dropdown group. And it's going to be tab2.add group. And then we actually don't need to put the label inside of a variable because we're not going to use it after this. So let's just not do that and type at our dropdown group dot add label. So now we have a label and a dropdown. We also then need to say dropdown group dot orientation equal to row, just like the other one. So the label is going to be right next to the dropdown. So now that we have that, let's also say dropdown dot preferred size dot width is equal to 240. So this is just going to make our dropdown bigger. And when we send this to After Effects, element label is unknown or invalid. What did we do? We also actually want to add the dropdown to the dropdown group now. Was that the problem? No, line 24. Dropdown group dot add. I was wrong, guys. that label, it's not called a label, it's called a static text. So forget that ever existed. There is no label type, it's a static text. So right now it should work. As you can see, there is no static text because we have not filled it. Undefined, what we want to do is expressions. So now we have filled that static text with some text. And now it should work. Yeah, expressions loop out. So that's that. But as you can see, these are still like aligned in the middle. So what we could do now is say tab panel. Well, we could also do tab panel dot preferred size is equal to 350 and 300. This is just gonna make the panel bigger. The size of the panel is gonna already be big, or it's just gonna be bigger now. And what we can do now is say tab 1 or no, tab 2 dot align children, and we're just gonna say right. So now it's gonna align all the children to the right. So now the buttons are gonna, like, as you can see, the panel is much bigger now too, and the buttons are gonna go to the right here. And here this is smaller than what it was in the example. We could fix that by saying tab 1, because that was our tab 1 we had open. Tab 1, and then we say align children is equal to fill. So now it's gonna fill everything, and we could also then just delete this one because it's just gonna fill the edit text. It's gonna just fill the whole screen with the edit text. And to finish off this script, the last thing we want to do, what I do for every script, is just pass this object into our new panel function, and then also have that as a parameter here. And then inside of here, we're just gonna check this object, OPG, and then instance of, and then instance of panel. So if the current object the script is run on is already a panel, or if, and then what we want to do is we want to just use that panel instead of creating a new one. So if that is true, if it is an instance of a panel, just use that. And if it's not true, then just do new window, the thing we wrote in the beginning. So this is what I do for every script. If you don't do this, sometimes it will be buggy. So here's my site. I'll put some like snippets over here and just some descriptions and also some other links. So if you're interested in more of this kind of thing, I highly recommend you read the Peter Carell book, ScriptUI for Dummies. You can just read it online here. And this goes into really in-depth on everything you can do with ScriptUI. So I really highly recommend just using this book to learn the nitty-gritty of how to do all this stuff. This goes into way more depth than I just did. And also, if you're just on like coding and you forgot like how some things were called or what properties are on all the ScriptUI elements, you can just go to the yearbook, this yearbook doc here, and you can just see, say for example, window, and then you have all the all the methods that are on the window object. The constructor, how that works. Here I have a description and all the items, all the properties of that window object. So yeah, that was it. I'll put all the code we made on the website here and also have the video up here. So see you guys in the next video.